Hello, hello, hello. You are watching Book It on my YouTube channel. So if you haven't subscribed already, please do so. And if you're watching from Facebook, please go over to YouTube and subscribe. Every little step I take, I'm not going to be humping around because if it's not good enough, I'll work harder, right? Because I don't want you to tell me not to be cruel. Don't be cruel. I'm not going to be because we have something in common. And I just want to be your girlfriend. That was just off the top of the dome. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Book It, where a place where books are discussed. Today is February the 5th, 2024. Whether you're watching it live or the playback, I specifically did this book it on this very day. What is today? Today is Bobby Brown's 55th birthday. Woo! Yeah, yeah, yeah. And what are we talking about today? We are talking about Every Little Step, My Story, Bobby Brown. Now, this book came out in 2016. I was thinking about this. I was like, dang, when did the book come out? Because I read the book by holding the book. It came out in 2016. And as you can see, this is the hard copy of the book, right? And I listened to the audio. Y'all, if you know, okay, first of all, if you know me, this is Kendell, Lenice, the remix coach. If I didn't introduce myself, allow me to introduce myself. But if you know me, you know autobiographies are my favorite type of book. Not the only books I read, but it's my favorite. And if you look to the left, you can see Bobby Brown's book right there in the intro on the side. So every episode of Book It, you'll see this. And then I also listened to the audio book a few times, probably going to listen again. I just listened again. But I love the audio books when the author reads their own words, especially if it's a memoir. I like when an author reads their book. If Terry McMillan came on and she was reading her book, it's not a autobiography or memoir, but it's still her words. But it hits differently when it is a autobiography or memoir when the author. And Bobby was taking his time through that book, reading that book. And y'all know that Bobby Brown has been through a lot. So to come to those points where he's talking about, his daughter, and this is his son was still alive at this point, but talking about losing. Well, we'll talk about some of the book in a moment. But if you have not read this or if you have not listened to the audio, please listen. Please get this book. You'll understand Bobby a whole lot more if you're not a Bobby Brown fan. If you're not a New Edition fan, then a lot of this information is new for you. And from this book came a docuseries called Every Little Step. From this book came the Bobby Brown story that premiered in its highest numbers on BET both nights. This book, and it says, I want to tell the real story. But what's special about this book and how I got this book? Well, I got a picture with Bobby with this book, but I went to quickly, I'll tell you for those that are new to my channel, and then I'll hold the book back up and show you something else. But this book, sit it right there. This book is significant to me for many reasons. Obviously, I love Bobby Brown, and quickly I'll tell you how my love for Bobby Brown started. All right, so when I was little, I lived in Massachusetts, and before New Edition came out to the world, they were local in the areas, and they would perform for free at different places, talent shows, and all of that, right? So I loved New Edition as a whole. So how Bobby became assigned to me, like literally assigned to me, my cousin Marie, who is no longer with us, she was 2 years older than me. She's actually Bobby's age. She was born in 1969, May 13th, and Bobby, February 5th, 1969. So they were the same age, but her and Ralph were Tauruses. So she assigned Ralph to her as a Taurus. And because I was the younger cousin and Bobby was the youngest one in the group, she assigned Bobby to me. And now, at almost 53 years old myself, Bobby's still assigned to me, although he is happily married to Alicia Etheridge Brown. We know this. But so that's when my love affair with Bobby started. When I say love affair, obviously I'm saying it loosely. That's when I, really loved Bobby Brown. And in New Edition, he was the one that really stood out. He did his own thing. If you look back at album covers, if you look at videos, he was that, some might say wild card, but he was the individual that you couldn't fit into a box. And sometimes that worked for him, and sometimes it didn't. It worked for him as a solo artist, but it didn't work for him in a group when he was younger. Now he's mature and everything is gravy, but it didn't work for him in the group because that's a restraint when you're free spirit and like to do what you do. All right. And he started New Edition. Y'all do know that, right? Okay, so this book, this is Book It, so we're going to focus on Book It. But if you want to know more about Bobby Brown, and I did a little piece of Black History for Black History Month with Bobby Brown, check that out on my YouTube channel. And I go more into the starting of New Edition and talking about Bobby Brown. But this is Book It, so we're going to focus on the book. All right. I'm going to see if y'all can see something real quick. I want to see if y'all can see that real quick. And that's Bobby Brown's signature right there. And it said, "Love, Bobby Brown," right? So Howard University in Washington, D.C., their Barnes & Noble there, they had a book signing. So my girl and Chanel and I, that's my buddy. That's my girl. That's my friend. That's my homie. But also that's my New Edition, all things New Edition road dog. So we go to DC to go to Bobby Brown's book signing. We got there like super duper early. We got there like probably 3 or 4 hours before. And then it was a couple of other people that came. So it was quiet in there. Nobody was in there because a lot of people didn't come, obviously, as early as we did. But we wanted to make sure we were first in line. We wanted to make sure we got a good seat. We wanted to make sure that, where can I put it? Okay. We wanted to make sure that, we would be able to do what we do and come what we came for. So it's quiet in there. People start trickling in. And because we're there early, I just start talking to people, no camera on, none of that stuff. I just was like, to try to break it up because everybody's just quiet and you're just waiting and then waiting. So I started saying, okay, so when did you fall in love with, New Edition or Bobby Brown? Or what's your favorite Bobby Brown song? Or if you had to choose between this song, and I just was off the top of my head, just asking questions. And I was going around to people. Remember, it was light in there. It might have been like 6, 7 of us, right? So I'm just talking to them. So as it starts getting more packed and people start coming in, then I'm asking, some of the questions, and then I fall back. Well, the manager of Barnes & Noble at Howard University and then Howard University TV asked if I would host it. So that was an unpaid gig that I would gladly do over and over again. So they gave me a mic, then they put the television camera on. So as I'm still doing the same things, I'm doing that and we're singing and I'm coming up with all these trivia questions and, I'm laughing and dancing and, doing what I do. And y'all know how I love Bobby. So it's easy. And a lot of the information I already know. So it was easy. I didn't have to prep for it, obviously. And then started reading. Did we start reading excerpts from the book? No, the book wasn't there yet. No, some people had the book. So I was reading excerpts from the book. And then the people at Howard University and Barnes and Noble started giving me water and had the camera crew. I was like, well, hold up, this is a whole gig. So that's how I ended up hosting Bobby Brown's book signing at Howard University in 2016. And so I did that all the way until Bobby came out. So then when he came out, his people knew that I was hosting it, and they were, grateful and thankful, because when you're waiting, it doesn't seem as long as when you're waiting, doing something and having fun and talking about Bobby and why we're all there. And everybody was reminiscing. People had on their shirts or Bobby Brown shirts, and, people had the gear. Basine, that's where I met her. She had all her buttons, it's a different type of crowd. If you're a New Edition lover or a Bobby Brown lover, then you get it. But if you don't understand quite how it is. Like, we roll deep, and it really is an instant family. Some of these women I see in California, Detroit, Maryland, Jersey, like, you'll run into them all the time, and it becomes this little family in a sense. Like, hey, are you going such and such? Oh yeah, da, da, da. So it becomes that. So when Bobby came out, now don't get it twisted, I wasn't a replacement for Bobby. They still wanted to see Bobby, but it made the wait a little easier, from what I'm told. All right, so then Bobby comes out, and he smelled amazing. Everybody was talking about that. He was very kind. He was very gracious to everybody. So the rules were, his people came out and was like, he's not going to sign anything other than the book. He's not going to, have conversations longer than this, because they wanted to get all those people through. So we had come up with the idea, since we were there first. We were like, okay, we're going to give everybody numbers to make it easy. So we were like the first 3 people, and then each person came, we gave them a number. That way we would call, and we started orchestrating the whole thing. We're like, okay, 1 through 6, we can go up there, and okay, 8 through 15. And we kind of streamlined it to make it easier for everybody. So everybody wasn't going to bum rush Bobby or get in the line. So we kind of started doing numbers, and it worked well. So when it was time to come up there, they gave the rules. Bobby ain't doing all that. Well, Bobby did do all that, because Bobby being Bobby, I wish I had my shirt. I got a shirt. He signed the shirt, my Bobby Brown shirt that I bought with me. Of course, he signed the books, but honey, he was calling people's mamas. They was like, can you call my auntie? Can you call my mama? Mamas was praying for him over the phone. He was very gracious and kind, and took time with each person. It wasn't like an assembly line where he just rushed through and signed and signed and signed. It was conversations had. There were jokes and laughter. He took his time with each person in that line, and he was very gracious and kind. And after, remember, I was like the first 3 people to get mine. So after that, I sat down in the front row. So like where the computer is to where I am, that's where I was. So the computer is Bobby, and I'm sitting here in the front row. So I can see everybody getting their book signed. And the reason why I'm saying that is because how people can be like, or talk under their breath and all of that, like, oh, this line, hurry up. Even though you're doing what you love, you're complaining. And you've seen people like that. I watched Bobby so intently, not stalking, not like, you know what I mean? But just sitting there, and I just was watching like, wow. And when I tell you, he treated everybody the same, with kindness and consideration and thoughtfulness. And he went above and beyond, like I said, calling people stuff, signing CDs and albums and shirts and whatever. And he waited until the very last person, and he did that. And he was smiling, laughing, joking, and which made you see his heart, because everybody says that's, the bad boy of R&B, that's what they gave him, and he was dealing with all of this. And y'all remember, he was young. He was 14 years old. 14. You know what I'm saying? And as he was going through, when he married Whitney, he was only 23. And she was much older than he was. He was only 23. So your brain don't even fully develop until you're 25. Then you got trauma and drama. He was seeing trauma and drama for forever. So let's get into the book. So since we're talking about trauma and drama with Bobby, where do I want to start? He's seen his mom when he was younger get arrested by the cops and beat with a billy club in front of his eyes, in front of his house, because his mom saw men roughing up, saw the police roughing up some black men, boys in the neighborhood. So she went out there as a citizen, as a mom, to try to like diffuse it or to take up for them, and they done beat her up and then threw her in jail. So he, as a little boy, is looking outside of the window. Then his father wasn't home. They couldn't get a hold of him because his father lived there too. He was at work. They couldn't get a hold of him. And because Bobby was a little boy, they put him in protective custody at a church or a priest, where a priest fondled him and tried to do all these things to him as a little boy. And he ran away from there. And then to see his best friend, you know, pass away right in front of him, stabbed, right? Best friend. He's a little kid. He tells them not to move him, to leave him there. He wanted to run back to their building in Roxbury, their Orchard Park projects. So he was in, if you know about the projects, like the courtyard. So he was running across the courtyard to go to the house of his friend's mom, Jimmy, and told them not to move him. But they felt, the other boys felt like they had to do something because he's bleeding out. So they carry him all across the courtyard and then kind of plop him right there at his mother's feet at their building. And he passes away. So Bobby sees that. And it's crazy. So that's all the stuff we're talking about. 7, 8, 9. We're not even talking about teenager. We're talking about a little boy in the tree, as Bobby always says, the little boy in the tree. We're talking that, right? So seen a lot. And then his older sister, the oldest one of 8, because Bobby is one of 8, passed away. So he dealt with that. And then we can go on and on and on. We know, fast forward. So he already was dealing with depression from a lot of that. And back then they weren't calling it a thing, or they think you crazy or call you crazy. And he was dealing with that. And later he finds out as an adult that he has a chemical imbalance also. So dealing with mental wellness and dealing with depression and being medicated for depression. They weren't doing that back then in the 70s or 80s. Nobody was talking about that. They'd be like, oh, they crazy, right? So even Bobby played into that. It's me, the crazy one. You know what I mean? As, you know, in the beginning of the song, it's me, the crazy one, you know, doing all of that. And then he's drinking and smoking, and then eventually harder drugs, because when you deal with a lot of trauma, right, you want to numb the pain. And that's what he did. Everybody has their different coping mechanisms, but he wasn't able to face that. Even what the priest did, like, he never told anybody. He didn't even tell his mom. He didn't tell anyone. So he's carrying all this stuff with him. So just imagine that you're carrying all this stuff with you, and you don't even know how to address it or how to deal with it. You're a child, right? So then your group blows up as a child. So now you're this child. Well, not with all this money yet, because he didn't really make money until he went solo, because y'all know what happens. Y'all done seen plenty of episodes of Unsung and heard biographies and autobiographies and movies and memoirs to know that you don't make no money and people, you know, rob you blind and all of that when it comes to the music industry. But and after he inked his deal and just having money, then think about it. You're the breadwinner of your entire household, and you got 8 kids, one passed away, so you got 7, right? 7 of y'all. You got your mother, your father, you have extended family. Y'all know what it is. So he is pretty much the head man in charge as a child, making the money. So that gives you the money, that gives you the power, that gives you the redemption, that gives you the swag, the attitude, And then he always say, I ain't the best singer in the world, but I'm an entertainer. I'm going to dance. And this is what I want people to understand. He talks about this in the book, and we know. For those that know Bobby Brown now with his little weight gain, I would rather see him with his weight gain and be clean of everything than to be dealing with addiction and he's smaller. Okay, so lay off my boy with that. But just imagine, right, that you are dealing with all of that. So he talks about that. He talks about, of course, his life with Whitney. He talks about his children extensively. He talks about his 2 strokes. He talks about his heart attacks with an S. He talks about depression. He talks about what happened. And I don't want to make it seem like that this is just like, dang, it's a sad book. He also talks about the bad chicks that he had, Janet Jackson, Madonna, the list goes on. Lisa Ray, he had a relationship with Lisa Ray, McCoy. He talks about the women in his life, and what he was. Think about it. You the hottest dude in the game. You're young. You got money. You got attitude. You got swag. And the women, he didn't have to chase no women. You know what I'm saying? So he talks about that. He shares a lot about how he was in love with Janet Jackson, and her dad, he was basically too black to be with her. His dad was not having that. Her dad was not having that. And he was like, you ain't in control. Like, you got the song out control, but you ain't controlling your own life. That's just a song because, you know, we're, together in love, but you can't because I don't look or act the picture, right? So he talks about that. But I want to read the front jacket. Bobby Brown, the singer, the dancer, and all around amazing performer, first became famous at the age of 14 as a part of the Boston group New Edition, but his solo career was released in that second album, 1988, Don't Be Cruel, with his chart-topping title track, Don't Be Cruel, My Prerogative and Every Little Step, that made him infamous. And he toured the world, wowing fans, scoring hit after hit, earning millions. Brown found himself in the fodder of tabloids when he married the most celebrated singer in the world at the time, pop princess Whitney Houston. He began a life under the microscope. The couple's every move was tracked. Jaw-dropping stories were told about drug addiction, physical violence, and worse. Bobby Brown was always cast as the villain. Forever branded, Brown was trapped in a spiral of rage against the media and drug addiction, fighting for the will to get himself clean and keep his family together. Now, the man behind the misconceptions, rumors, and lies bears his soul in his honest, raw, at times heartbreaking account. Brown, and it is heartbreaking at some points. It's like, man, and he's 55 years old today, and God has kept him with all of this that he's gone through. In his let me see where Brown tells the truth of his life. Every Little Step is a story of a kid growing up in the projects of Boston, also always on the move and always looking for an audience. Brown revealed what happened when he left New Edition to launch his solo career, and the tales of his relationships with some of the most prominent pop divas in the world, including intimate details of his marriage to Whitney Houston that describes the purity of their love and the devastation he felt as it crumbled. And then of course he talks about Bobby Christina, and all through it, Brown shows himself to be a family man, devoted to his children and his wife, a man who cared for both of his parents right up until their deaths, and a man who can admit where he faltered but had the strength to stand back up again. Now, people don't understand, people know about Bobby Christina and they know when Whitney passed, but people don't realize that his mm, his if you think about this, it's like, wow, his mom and dad passed in the same calendar year. He was trying to prepare himself because his dad had cancer, and he was trying to prepare himself to wrap his head around that I'm going to lose my dad. And when he got the call from his brother Tommy, his older brother, who is 9 years, I think 9 years older than him. Yeah, 9 years older than him, to come to the hospital, he thought it was his dad because his dad they were preparing themselves, and it turned out to be his mom, Carol Brown. So just think about that in itself. You're trying to wrap your head around your father having cancer, and okay, he put him up. This is when Bobby was building himself back up. By the way, when he left the marriage with Whitney Houston, when he went into the marriage, he had more money than Whitney, because Whitney's father was like, well, how much money do you have? You want to marry my child? And he showed, his father was like, okay. But then he loved her so much. And remember, he was young. He was 23 when they got married. And his accountant and his brother warned him against it. But he just put all his money with her money. And that's what he did, like all his millions with hers. And she didn't even have as much yet. And just imagine that. And then when he left the marriage, he walked away with nothing. He said he just wanted to leave, right? So he didn't even take his Grammys with an S. He didn't take his accolades. He didn't take his clothes. He didn't take anything. He left. And when he was able to revisit, because he was trying to move past, things that Whitney was still doing, he had already gotten himself clean, and they just weren't seeing eye to eye. And when it comes to recovery, that you got to be ready when you're ready. So when he left and then tried to get his stuff, and then, they did him dirty. They done sold all his stuff, got rid of his stuff, her team and her family. He didn't have nothing, all his Grammys, all his accolades, his clothes, everything. They were mad, and he didn't get none of his stuff. So he had to start over from scratch. So when his father and mother were sick, he wanted to make sure he got his dad, and he had an apartment, and then he had an apartment with him, his brother, and his dad, and they were taking care of his dad, and his dad was sick with cancer. And then even though his mother and father were still married, they were separated. Y'all know how some Black people do. You'd be separated for 15, 20 years. That was his dad. Yes, Reba. I don't understand. Yep. So much. So it's so interesting. A lot of people don't know that. But so he had gotten an apartment with those three, but his mom and dad were separated for all those years. But when his mom knew that his dad was really, really, really sick, she was like, I'm coming back, because she was in Atlanta. She was like, I'm coming to LA to look over your dad and make sure he's good. And they weren't even married. But when it came, that's what Bobby always talk about the Browns. When it comes to it, the Browns going to stick together. So he ended up getting a 2-bedroom house for his mom and dad to be there. And his mom had COPD, so she wasn't feeling the best, but in their eyes, the father was in worse condition. So imagine you get the call from the hospital thinking that you prepared yourself for your father to pass, and then you find out it's your mom. He said he couldn't even stand up. He was just screaming in the hospital. He couldn't even stand up. And then within the same year, months later, his father dies. And then a couple of months after that, Whitney dies. So in a calendar year, he lost his mother, father, and his ex-wife of 15 years, right? And then we know even in the book, he doesn't talk about this because it hadn't happened yet. But his son, well, then, Bobby Christina. So you're dealing with all of that after all of that, after all of that. You're in the public eye. You're wondering, he's like, what is going on? Why is this on me? Like, why? Like, how much can I take? Not to mention that, fast forward, I'm going to rewind a little bit. His sister's fiance, he went to Boston because people were fighting and arguing from the same projects where he's from, Orchard Park, right? So he goes to try to do a truce. Like, what y'all doing? Y'all both from OP. Y'all shouldn't be fighting each other. Y'all should love one another, right? And it went right. Everybody was kumbaya. They were fine. And they still had a problem. The car, and Bobby's in the car. Bobby slouches down under the seat, and they end up getting his sister's fiance. So now his sister hadn't spoke to him for years behind that because she felt like it was her brother's fault, Bobby's fault. So he didn't even have his sister in his life because that was her fiance that lost his life that day. So you're dealing with all of that. Then you're dealing with trying to cope with all of that with drug addiction and alcohol. The first time he had alcohol, he was a little boy. And this happens, I've heard this a million times. He was like 7 or 8. And his father would leave, beer if he would finish the beer, and it'd be a little bit left. And he would take a sip. And that's when he started liking the taste of alcohol. I've heard other men say that before. And that's when he started. So alcohol, and then he was smoking weed, but he wasn't doing any drugs like what he and his ex-wife Whitney ended up doing until then. And everybody knows that story. That was a hot butterball mess. They were both deep in their addiction. And then, we hear about Bobby getting arrested in the Bad Boy. It was from one DUI, but because of the probation and different things on it, every time he went to jail or got arrested was behind that same one. A lot of people don't know that. And a lot of people, he wanted to clarify, and he was like, it hurts my soul that people think I even hit my wife. And we saw some of that scene that he talks about in the book play out in the movie. He and his brother were getting ready to go away. And he and his brother were in the car, and he went back in the house and saw Whitney. He had said bye and everything. She was alone. Well, she snuck the dealer into the house, and she was trying to, get high, do her thing. And he was like, what are you doing? And he went to try to take it away and bopped her. Like, he was so mad, he went to go yank it. And of course, they're like, oh my God, and he was like, that hurts him the most, because never has he ever put his hand on any woman. And if you know all about his sisters and his mom, so he's like, that's one of the things. And then when Whitney went on Oprah, and when she was like, he's going to be mad at this, he was like, Dad, going right, I'm going to be mad at what you're saying because it's not true, And sometimes when you have interviews, and some interviewers will kind of plant seeds, so this happened, and try to kind of do that. And he really felt like that. So this book, even listening again after reading it and after listening to the audio before, just listening again still compelled me the same way. Like, I never read it, like I never watched it, the movie, like I never heard some of the stories. And then I love that they have the pictures. This one thing about books and autobiographies, I can show you my shelf to show you how many autobiographies I have and I've read. But I love when they put pictures, like glossy pictures in here. And then he wanted to be a rapper when he started Flash B. And here's his family and his mom and dad at the bottom that I was talking about. His mom and dad, Pop Brown and Ma Brown, and his family, him and his mom. I love when it's just glossy like this. Him and his oldest daughter, LaPrincia. It's inverted right here. Ralph Tresvant, for those that don't know, and Bobby. Then you have Bobby Jr., Bobby Brown, and Cassius. That's his youngest son. This was when he and Alicia got married. And that's more of the wedding there. There's his oldest son, Landon. See? It's over here. Sorry, I'm trying to, the camera is backward. You see? So they have that. Alicia, his wife, and that's when his, see, they have 3 kids together now at their wedding, and they have been married quite a long time now. I wanted to try to, as I end, I want to try to just read wherever I land. Mm. And one thing about this book too, even though it's Bobby's memoir, he gives the platform to his brother Tommy, writes some things, his sister Leola Brown, his wife Alicia, Ralph Tresvant does, his son Landon, his son Bobby Jr., his daughter LaPrincia. Like, for instance, it says a few words from Leola Brown. That's his sister. So I love the fact hearing their perspective on what Bobby is about to say or what he said. The way it is, it's amazing. Bobby Jr. talks about how he thinks that Whitney Houston didn't like him because, I don't know if you guys know, before Whitney and Bobby got married, he had his second child by Kim. Bobby Jr. and LaPrincia Brown are both by Kim, his child's mother, after his first mother, Landon. So his oldest son, Landon, is Carl Payne, Cole from Martin. That's his stepson because he married Malika, which is Landon's mom and Bobby's first child's mom. Okay. And he talks about how Carl Payne and him were friends, and he felt like, wait, you've been plotting on my girl the whole time, but how they're all like family now. But because he was 17 years old when he had Landon. But Bobby Jr. says that he didn't think Whitney liked him because the story goes is he and Whitney were dating. They split for a moment. This is before they got married. Keep in mind, Bobby like 21, something like that, 22. And he went to go see his child, LaPrincia, with Kim. And Kim was like, "You ain't got to go home. You can stay here a little bit." He like, "No, I'm leaving. I'm talking to Whitney now." And the one and the two hit, and then she became pregnant. So this is before they got married, and right then, and then Whitney was upset, and then they named him Bobby Jr. And she's like, "Wait a minute, I wanted to have a child." So when she had her child, and she named her Bobby Christina, Bobby Jr. felt like she was resentful because it was kind of during he and Whitney's relationship, and before they got married, when they hadn't labeled anything yet, and Bobby Jr. felt like he was being replaced. He also addresses the rumors with cheating and talking about some of the people that Whitney cheated with Tupac. When I read that in the book the first time, I was like, now what now? And he's labeled as a cheater, or whatever that they were going through. And he was like, I'm just going to tell the truth about it. The photos add to the story. Yes. The narrative, it's deep. And he's telling his own story. So you know how some people tell their own story and it tries to make them look like the best and the angel. He tells it all. He tells his part. He tells their part. Yes, Tupac. And I was like, Whitney and Tupac? But he, he goes into the detail. You got to get the book, and he talks about how he was upset, and of course, um, we already know he don't like Ray J because he was at the scene. That's a whole different thing. I could be here all day, and I don't want to keep it too long. But let me pick what I'm gonna talk about. So this is from his sister, and it just came to that, so I'm gonna do that. Leola Brown. Over time, Whitney and I became close confidants. We had plenty of secrets we shared. She told me many things that she'd never told anyone before, things she needed to get off her chest. Whitney was very private. She kept things very close to the vest, but I saw how the people around her sometimes did things that really hurt her. There was one image that I'll never forget. It happened one day when I was working as her assistant. We were about to go shopping to get our nails done. Whitney needed some cash. I pulled the car into the parking lot at the bank on the corner of Piedmont and Peachtree in Atlanta, the one with all the windows. I even parked in the handicapped spot because she said she was going to take a second. After a while, I wondered why it was taking her so long to come out. When I walked into the bank, I saw a scene that will stay with me forever. Whitney was standing in the middle of the bank, talking real loud with her hands waving in the air, and people were staring at her with their mouths hanging open. Luckily, we didn't have cell phone videos back then. I'm thinking, what in the world is going on? Then I heard what had happened. The tellers had just told Whitney she didn't have any money in her account. She was standing there incredibly mad and embarrassed. What do you mean I can't get no money out of my account? She said loudly. Ma'am, one of the women behind the glass said calmly, as we said, there's no money in that account. I was so upset for her. Someone must have taken the money out of her account. It had to be an awe moment for her. The whole bank was in shock that this was happening to the Whitney Houston. When I was there with Nippy and Bobby, my primary job was to take care of Chrissy and do a lot of the day-to-day things. Nippy, they called Whitney that, and Bobby needed done. Chrissy was about 11 or so. By this time, in my opinion, she had a good life. I bring her to school every day. When she came home, she would hang out with her friends in the neighborhood. She had a lot of family time with her parents, doing fun things like going to restaurants, movies, events that they were invited to. Sometimes they would do things without the rest of the family so they could have quality time, just the three of them. Other times, they would bring the whole family, nieces, nephews, etc. They loved Chrissy intensely. She was well cared for. She was protected. I read things where people were saying that she was neglected and that couldn't be further from the truth. Even when they were caring for themselves, they had a full staff of people on hand to take care of every need. There was so much love between them that I didn't think the marriage would ever end. I never thought things were so bad that they couldn't work it out. I was amazed by some of the incredible things I would see my brother do when I was around him. People just don't understand how big his heart is. Bobby would walk around with a checkbook and write checks for anybody who was in need. There are so many people who wouldn't have finished college without him. Young people, even strangers, would walk up to him sometimes with stories about how their parents didn't have the money this month for their tuition. Bobby would ask how much and write a check to them. He paid people's rent. He paid for people's funerals. He would never ask questions or any proof. And the public would never hear about any of it. It didn't matter if you were white, black, he didn't care. One time in Atlanta, it was getting cold outside. We saw a homeless guy sitting there on the ground without any shoes on his feet. Bobby saw him and asked the driver to pull over. He literally took the sneakers off and gave them to the man. Then he went and bought him some food and gave him hundreds of dollars in cash. I remember another time there was this bum we used to see all the time when we went downtown Atlanta. So Bobby had enough. He went back home and got a bunch of his clothes, stuffing them into bags. He brought the bags back to the man along with some food. You should have seen the look on the man's face. He was shocked and so happy. One time, Bobby, Whitney, and I wanted a quick bite to eat. So we went into the Buckhead Diner on Piedmont, a long time Atlanta institution. When we walked in, there were two white guys sitting at the bar. The guys immediately said hi to Whitney, but didn't say anything to Bobby as we sat down. They kept looking over at him, saying nasty things like Whitney shouldn't even be with him and get out of here and she should leave you. Finally, Bobby got up and walked over to them. I kind of held my breath because I didn't know what to expect. It had the potential to get bad in a hurry, depending on how Bobby handled it. Bobby sat down at the bar next to them and said, "You know, I'm not a bad person. You're yelling and saying all this foul stuff to me, but I haven't done anything to you." The guys at first stared at him without saying anything. Then they started talking to him and wound up having a great conversation. They eventually apologized to him, telling him he was a really nice guy. He could have handled it differently. He would have been justified giving them the same kind of nastiness they were giving him. He could have said, "F you, let's take this outside. Bobby is from OP and he certainly is capable of taking it there." But he didn't do that. He sat down and calmly spoke to them with kindness to point where these two white men said sorry, and that's who Bobby really is. So I just picked, I didn't know what I was going to read. I just randomly did that. And that's so beautiful. So then you have like Ralph talking about he didn't believe, he talks about, how he was supportive. Ralph was supportive of Bobby's solo career. And he also talks about where he didn't believe Bobby when Bobby said he was going with Whitney Houston and he did not believe it. He said, Ralph says in the book, well, he didn't believe it until they were going somewhere in Bobby's hotel room. Whitney, he came around the hotel room and seen Whitney like banging on Bobby's door and thought Bobby might have been in there with a girl. She was going off banging the door. And Bobby and Ralph came around the corner. They wasn't even in the door. And Bobby was like, Ralph said at that time, he was like, yeah, she loved him. Like they together. But it's like, and I love, a lot of people speak. Alicia keeps it all the way 100 in this book, talking about when they met and how Whitney and her friend was calling Alicia. I was like, dang, and trying to find out where Bobby was. You know how you used to do back in high school. You got somebody on a three-way and you don't tell the person. Honey, they keep it all the way. So you definitely have to get the book. Of course, most of the book it shows are less than 30 minutes, but this is Bobby and this is his birthday. But I could go on and on and on and on. I could do a part 2 if you want me to, but I'm going to end here. But this is Book It, Every Little Step. My story, Bobby Brown. He says, I became famous with New Edition when I was just 14. But despite my 3 decades in harsh media glare, the public has never really heard my story. What Bobby Brown is thinking, what he's doing, what he did, what he didn't do. And he talks about how he hasn't been able to go to the cemetery where Bobby, Christina, and Whitney are. But and this came out in 2016, but a couple years ago, he came out with Every Little Step, the docu-series, and he finally went there. Yeah, she was banging on the door. It's so much like, and if you listen to it, and Bobby, Bobby just taking his time reading the book, on the audio part. But then when it comes to the hard parts and you hear his voice talking about it, man, and talking about Bobby, Christina, and how that whole thing went down, and that whole thing, even he talks about Robin, and saying if Robin was still, which was Robin was Whitney's best friend. I'm going to review that book too. I read that a couple of times. But if Robin was still in Whitney's life, she wouldn't have had those people around her and she might still be here. And he talks about how Whitney and his daughter, Bobby Christina, passed the same way. Like, it's not all, he'd been through a lot. So I ain't even going to lie to you. It's a lot of heavy, deep stuff in here. But it's also some stuff that'll make you smile and make you laugh. But a lot of his life was deep, and it's in here. And to see him, like I just saw him in concert 2 weeks ago, and to see him still standing and still sounding good and looking good and clear, you can tell he is like free of that. He goes to therapy, he meditates. He's in a place of peace. you know, he addressed the depression, and he, you know, I just, a story like that of redemption with somebody real. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not for play, and he's really doing the work. And I really think Alicia is an amazing partner for him. You know, she manages his career, but she also manages his life in a way where she's making sure he's eating right. She's making sure he's, you know, doing what he's supposed to do. And it's just, you know, the right partner, you know. And he did walk away from the relationship with Whitney, and he talks about that, how she was pissed. So she was still fully into her addiction, and he was trying to get her to stop, and she was pissed. She was mad that he left. She pretty much turned Bobby Christina against, saying that he don't love us, he left, he don't love the family. And then when he got into another relationship after the divorce, oh, she was really upset, like anybody would. She was with him for 15 years because she had kept hope that they would get back together, and then they didn't. And then when he had his baby, his daughter, he was like, it hurt. His daughter was so upset with him and asked if he was trying to replace her. It's just crazy. And then you think about when she passed away, right in the middle of that, he had a new daughter born, which is so eerie. And she actually asked if he was trying to replace her, and he wasn't. He was just having another child. And then his daughter Bodie was born right when Bobby Christina was passing away. It's just, you know, it's deep. But hearing about Bobby when he was little and going through the whole thing, because he starts there. Of course, his life doesn't start with his famous relationship with Whitney. It starts when he was little. All right, I'm out of here. Listen now. This is Book It. I want you to elevate your mind. Books can take you places that you may never go. So pick up a book and read it. This is Book It. Kendell and Lenice. God bless y'all. Peace. Any questions before I leave? I'm sorry. I'm leaving y'all hanging. My pleasure. Make sure y'all get a copy. Make sure you listen to the audio book and let me know what you think in the comments. Until next time, God bless y'all. Peace. Happy 55th birthday, Bobby! Woo! Ain't God good? Thank God for birthdays. Ain't God good? All the time. Oh, thank you. I didn't want to, you know, it's Bobby, so I felt like I was rambling, but thank you. So you saying that, that means a lot. Thank you. I appreciate you, Reba. Y'all have a good day, night, or evening. If you're watching this live, make sure you comment. If you're watching the playback, please do so. Whew. Yeah, you do have to attend a New Edition event with me. It's different. I'm gonna tell you right now, it's different. It's gonna hit different. It's gonna hit different. I don't sit down at a New Edition concert. I don't sit down. Look, I got so excited about this, I realized I didn't even put the book information at the bottom. All right, y'all. Peace. I'm leaving for real.